chorus of one of my favorite songs, and then I have a story or two for you. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, oh, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. My grandmother's apron. My grandmother's apron is old and worn. The fabric is thin and the pocket is torn. The colors are faded, but her memory is still vivid in my mind. I could never forget that Jamaican grandmother of mine. I had a Jamaican grandmother. At least that's what I was told. Because you see, I never met the woman until I was 10 years old. And that's where this story begins to unfold. She came into my life like a breath of fresh air, like a whirlwind. Everything about her was different and new and foreign. I loved the way she talked, the way she smelled, the way she dressed. She would mix bright colors with different patterns like flowers or plaid, and she didn't care. She would wear it boldly, proudly. She would wrap a headscarf upon her head as a crown. I had a Jamaican grandmother, and she was magical. My grandmother and I, we became fast friends. You see, she loved to cook, and so did I. Oh, and she made the most amazing, magnificent dishes, things I had never heard of or seen. And she would invite me into the kitchen. She would pull up a chair, and she would let me stand on that chair so I could see everything clearly. She would take off her apron, and she would tie it around my chest. Because even though I was 10 or 11, I was still kind of small. And she tied her apron around me, and she would let me help her. And she would tell anyone else who came into the kitchen. And Patois, she would say, "This here is my number one assistant here. My gal who will help me in the kitchen." And so I was there, I was ready. I watched as she would mix and measure things with ordinary silverware and coffee cups. She never used a recipe or a cookbook. And I would say, "Grandma, how do you do it? How do you know what to put in to each dish?" And she would say, "Oh, child, I've been doing this a long time. It's all in here and in here. Just watch and you'll learn how to make it just so." And so I watched her as she would prepare the most amazing dishes. She would make ackee and saltfish with fried dumplings for breakfast. Sometimes she would boil dumplings or green bananas to go with our dinner. She might make curry chicken or curry goat, rice and peas. Some days she would fry plantain, so sweet and buttery. I loved to watch her cook, and I learned from her every step of the way. My grandmother loved to cook, but she also loved to give food as a gift. Every year she would save up her money, and she would send some of that money to our relatives in New Jersey. They, in turn, would send us a beautiful, delicious black cake. Has anybody ever had black cake before? You have. 2 weeks ago. Anybody else ever had black cake? Never heard of it. Oh, well, if you've never had black cake, let me tell you. How do I describe it? It's a dark cake. Dark, dark, dark brown, almost black. And it has a beautiful white royal icing on the outside that kind of hardens, and you can crack it open as you slice your cake. The cake itself is dense and rich and buttery. It looks like chocolate, but it's not. It's a rum and wine soaked fruitcake, I guess is the best way to describe it, but it's better than any fruitcake you've ever had in your life. Oh, it's delicious, it's yummy, it's boozy, it's fruity. And as a little kid, I thought it was a little bit naughty. Because you see, my parents, they would never let me drink alcohol. But every year for Christmas, they would let me have a slice of that black cake. And mostly because my grandmother insisted. She would say, come now, give the little child a piece of cake. And I would savor that black cake every bite. And I thought maybe, just maybe, this is illegal. And I enjoyed it. And it made me feel so special, so mature, so grown up. Because I was the oldest grandchild. And none of the younger kids got to enjoy that black cake. And my grandmother, she had that way about her. She had a way of making all of us, all of her grandkids, feel special and seen and loved. I guess that's why I hold on to this ratty old apron. It reminds me that I had a Jamaican grandmother, and she was magical to me. And one day, maybe, I'll get a chance to be a magical grandmother too. My last story is a story that I first heard from my grandmother. My grandmother, when she came to live with us, she had a practice of sharing bedtime stories. And sometimes they would be personal stories about her life in Jamaica, and other times she would share folk tales. The Anansi stories were my favorite. And so this is the first Anansi story that I ever heard. Does anybody know who Anansi is before I go on? Anansi, who is Anansi?
Anansi is a spider god.
Oh, he is a spider god. Yes, he is. And what can he do? Anybody know what Anansi can do? He plays tricks on people. Absolutely. He is a trickster supreme. Yes, he is. And she mentioned he was a spider god. That means he has magical powers. He could transform himself from a spider to a man or anything else in between. And these stories were passed down from those who were kidnapped from the shores of West Africa. These stories were some of the only things that they could take with them. Because, see, they were taken unaware suddenly. They didn't have time to pack a bag or bring a suitcase. The only thing they could carry were their memories and their stories. And so this story had been passed down from generation to generation to generation till it got to my grandmother. And then she shared it with me. The name of the story is Anansi and Fire. Can you say fire? That's how my grandmother would say it. We would say fire, but she would say fire. And I'm going to tell it to you with a bit of the patois, the way my grandmother would tell it to me. I'm going to tell it to you the way I heard it. All right? Once upon a time, Fire was a pretty little girl who did always live in the woodland. She never go a house, but she just a pray. Say that one day, somebody, anybody, would invite her into the house so she could see how it stands. Are you following me? One day, she wanted to be able to see what it looked like to go inside of a building. She never had been invited inside of a house. She lived in the woods. All right. And as she sat there contemplating her fate, having some self-pity upon herself about not being able to be like the humans and go inside of a house, she looked up, and in the distance, she saw Brother Anansi coming her way. And as she was there burning in the root of a tree, she began to think of a plan with her big brain. She thought, what if I play a trick on Brother Anansi? She knew how he liked to play tricks on other people. And she also remembered that they said Anansi, he loved the pretty little gals. He loved beautiful women. And so, as Anansi came closer, Fire began to dance. She began to dance up and down and around and around. You know how fire flames can go on, just flickering and sparkling and shining. And she drew Anansi's attention. Anansi looked at Fire as she danced. He stopped in his tracks and he said, Looks, what a pretty little girl here. Ooh. And Sister Fire said, you like me? And Nancy said, sister, me go for you like ants go for sugar. I love you so much till I don't want to leave you. Sister Fire, I want to marry you. I want to be with you forever. Oh, Brother Anansi, it's too soon for that. Why don't we just get acquainted? Anansi said, no, Sister Fire, I don't want to leave. I want to stay here with you forever. I know that this is love. Sister Fire said, Anansi, don't be silly. You can't stay here. My mother, she don't like strangers. And if she come home and she find you here, she would have beat me. So you have to go. Go now, Nancy. And Nancy said, please, don't make me leave, Sister Fire, please. Fire said, well, you know what? Maybe I could come and see you. And Nancy said, really? Sister Fire, don't play with me. Oh, yes, Nancy, of course I will come and see you. When? I'll come tonight. How about 6 o'clock? And Nancy said, Sister Fire, make sure that you come and see me at 6 o'clock exactly. I will go home and fix up the place for you. And Anansi began to run off. And Sister Fire said, wait, Anansi. I have to tell you one thing. You see, me not like the other gals them. I don't have legs to walk. So you have to spread bands of dry trash and leaves and sticks and twigs for me walk upon to come to your house. And Anansi said, oh, Sister Fire, don't worry. I will fix up for you. Just make sure you come right at 6 o'clock. And so Anansi began to collect sticks and twigs and leaves, and he made a trail from the tree root, smack up to his doormat, right to his door. Anansi went in the house. He began to tidy up. He swept. He fluffed up the pillows on the couch. He put on a pot of collard greens, and he set out some hard-boiled bread and butter because he thought Fire might be hungry. He wasn't sure what Fire might like to eat, but he thought maybe she might want a little something to snack on. And just before 6 o'clock, he stepped out on his front porch to look for Fire. And as he stepped out on the porch, he smelled smoke. That was unusual. And then he looked out at the forest, out in front of his house, and he saw smoke rising from the tops of the trees. He had never seen that before, and he looked a little closer, and he saw what looked like flames. It looked like flames flickering between the trees. Anansi was frightened, and he called out, Fire? Sister Fire, is that you? And he looked again, and it seemed as though the fire was moving closer and closer to his house. And then Anansi realized it was Sister Fire. But she was no longer the pretty little girl that him did meet in the woodland. No, she had grown into a big, enormous, outsized woman. She had grown into a forest fire. And she was burning her way, hissing and smiling towards his house. Anansi was frightened. He said, Sister Fire, turn back. I don't want you no more. I don't want you. Sister Fire, please, go back to your mother. What would she think if she saw you here? Go home, Sister Fire. And as Anansi begged and pleaded, Sister Fire would not hear it. She continued on closer and closer to his house. And she not only continued to march to his house, she began to sing. She said, here come your fire, Nancy. I'm coming with the fire burn, Nancy. Here come your gal, Nancy. Me coming with the fire burn, Nancy. And Nancy, he was so frightened, he didn't know what to do, and she would not turn back. The heat got closer and closer. It got so hot that he had to run off and leave his house and hide in the nearby bushes. He watched fire burn along the trail he had made for her, right up the front walkway, right up the steps and into his front door. Fire went into the house, and we know what happened. she burned Anansi's house to the ground. And Anansi sat in the bushes crying. How could I have been so foolish? But his misfortune has come to teach us a great lesson. Anansi teaches us that no matter how beautiful, how lovely fire may dance, we have to remember that fire is dangerous and that when you play with fire, you will get burnt. It's Anansi. That's the end of the Anansi story. And at the end of every Jamaican Anansi story, the teller says, Jack Mandora me not choose none. And that just means, just in case this story isn't true, and it didn't happen just like I said it happened, Jack Mandora is who they were speaking to, who they thought was the keeper of heaven's gates. And just in case it wasn't true, they wanted him to know that, they shouldn't be charged with lying when it comes time to get into heaven. So they put out that disclaimer. Jack Mandora may not choose none. The end.